this week, I can't remember which day it was, but I went upstairs and asked my son if he wanted some pancakes. And he was like, well, we'll have to ask the owners.
What?
It's exactly what I said. And it's like, no, do you want a pancake? Well, we need to ask the owners. I'm like, we don't need to ask the owners. The pancake mix is done.
But also, you're the owner, surely, of the house.
Well, yeah, yes, definitely. And so, yeah, did his pancakes. And then the next one came out, we need to ask school for permission for me to go. And it was like, don't worry, we don't have to ask permission. You can go.
You are going.
Yes. So anyway, we realised something was going on. We wondered whether his ear infection had flared up again. But no, we took him to the doctors and he's got a urine infection, so we're back on antibiotics. But yeah, it's not been too bad. I mean, I'm saying it's not been too bad this week when I've been at work, so... How's your week been?
Well, has he shown signs of recovery now?
Yeah. So I mentioned to you we've been having a bit of a witching hour for the last few weeks, where he goes a little bit, I'm not going to say the F word, a little bit wobbly for an hour each night.
Fairly start swearing.
No, it wasn't that one. So, but yeah, he has calmed down a little bit at night time, so he's obviously... This ear infection and urine infection has been bubbling for quite a while. But as we know, our kids are not very good at saying, I'm not very well.
That's quite a week. Oh, my week's been all right. We've had the usual low-level disruption. Now, yeah.
Is it like that?
What Carly's doing is banging the table, and what one of my sons does is sits there when you're watching a film or something quietly, and he'll start kicking his foot against the table and making a banging noise, but then what he likes to do is touch my face a lot. Don't laugh.
Sorry.
It's absolutely charmingly beautiful and lovely, but also one of the most annoying things in my entire life, because I don't like being touched like that. No. But to be honest, as everyone will tell you, I don't like being touched. Full stop. I sometimes let my wife near me, but only when I'm ready for it. I don't mean like that. I mean when I'm aware that she's going to come anywhere near me. I don't mean like that either. But now I've set him off.
Yes.
This is Adopters Anonymous. Anything you say here is in the strictest confidence.
Who are these people?
Man, these people are heroes.
If you listen to their stories, it's like they're living a real-life Hunger Games.
There ain't nobody tougher than these two dudes.
This episode is the one we've been promising for a while, and now we're going to finally deliver. We are talking about the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund, otherwise known as the ASGSF. We're talking about that because there have been some cuts and the impact that they've had on adopters, potential adopters, foster carers, everybody in that support system for looked after children has been, and if not already, will be affected by this. And so here's Anna to explain what it all means.
The Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund is a UK government fund that provides money for therapeutic support to adopted children, plus those under special guardianship who've experienced trauma. It helps families access specialist assessments and therapy to support children's emotional well-being and stability. It's had a few key changes over time, but the most important happened in 2025 and 2026. Before April 2025, the fund had two specific limits: £5,000 per child per year for therapy and £2,500 per child per year for specialist assessments. Extra funding could be match funded to a sum of £30,000 in the most complex cases. In April 2025, some massive changes to the fund were made. The funding available for therapy was reduced from £5,000 to £3,000 per child per year. A separate assessment allowance worth £2,500 was removed and now included within the £3,000 total. Match funding was scrapped, so no extra funding above the limit is available. Support had to be completed within the financial year, so no multi-year packages. In February of this year, 2026, the government confirmed continuation of the fund to March 2028. Funding increased slightly, around £55 million in total. Plans were announced for wider reforms to adoption and kinship support. However, the reduced £3,000 limit and removal of match funding remain in place. Adoption organisations and adopters reacted with a mix of anger, anxiety and consternation. Many reported deep concerns and a widespread feeling of being left in limbo with much uncertainty. Anyone who's listened to Carl and Martin in this podcast will already be aware of the almighty challenges they've faced when attempting to get help for their children's needs. Adopters now fear that vital support streams have been lost, leading to families already at breaking point being pushed even further to the limit. There's a lot of anger because these cuts hit the most vulnerable children, disproportionately affecting children with the highest needs. With the removal of match funding in complex cases, many adopters feel the policy misunderstands what adoption actually requires. And just in case there's any doubt, these are not handouts that adopters receive. These are therapies, assessments and treatments that children need. The removal has led to a rise in campaigning, with adopters taking action. A grassroots campaign called Action Against ASGSF Changes was formed. Led by Claire Solomons and joined by Ewan Preston, it began to gather evidence from families and put pressure on Parliament to reconsider. It's been a massive mobilisation against the change in funding because, let's face it, anyone with any knowledge about adoption and who knows adopters understands how incredibly challenging it is. The needs are deep and entrenched, and the children suffer from deep-seated trauma that many children from regular birth families simply cannot comprehend, which may be why those in power refuse to take notice of those with lived experience.
What's your thought about all this? Because I hadn't really thought about how it might affect me really, because once you're in the throes of adoption, you just get on with it, don't you?
Well, you have to, don't you, really? But it could be made a lot easier. But I would not like to be starting the journey now. You know, we've had help from lots of different things, diagnoses, medication, some therapies. I would not like to be starting again with all these cuts that are in place. It's been fantastic. We love our son to bits, but it's been hard work, and that was without all these cuts in place. You have to fight for enough things, and this is just ridiculous.
Another battle is always what we want, isn't it? I mean, it's great. And I remember looking back at when we first adopted, the assessments that the kids went through, psychological assessments that hadn't been carried out at the right time, things that were done for us to try and work out, how their brains were functioning. And then as a result of that, some of the therapy that was given, in forms of play therapy. And, one of them was really great. We'd go and take the boys to a farm and they'd like feed horses. And it was really, really good. Obviously, We paid for none of that.
No.
But what would happen now? We wouldn't get that.
No.
I don't think.
No. So, like you say, that then our kids are losing out on that. You know, these are tools for therapists to just start opening some doors to, I don't know, help our kids kind of understand and maybe eventually, hopefully, to start talking, about their feelings, of what's happened, what makes me tick, is this the reason that I do this?
I mean, my boys both, not so much the younger, my oldest son clams up, doesn't want to talk about anything like that. And yet, that aspect of the therapy that they've had compared to the needs of some children is tiny. So we were lucky to get that funding for that therapy. But I'm sure, you can probably point to other examples that, you'd miss out on way more.
Yeah, definitely. There's therapy we used to have, it was before COVID, and it was really good. I used to take my son on my own, and it was working really well. Unfortunately, then COVID came, and it was just at the wrong time because we tried to go back to it and it didn't work. But I'm a little bit lost for words, really, because where we are now, the therapy that we had for our son couldn't engage, but it was an absolute godsend for myself and my wife, because we could go and chat and say, this has happened, this has happened, this has happened. And they go, well, yeah, I'd have reacted in exactly the same way. So don't beat yourself up. So although my son couldn't engage with it, we were getting that. And that meant that we, for an hour, were listened to. And it gave us time to go recharge his batteries. We've done all right there. Let's go again.
And that is vital, I think. And one thing we'll come back to at the end of the discussion you're about to hear is how important it is to make people appreciate the reality of what we're talking about here, because it is very hard to make people understand what those therapeutic needs are and why they're needed. But let's hear the conversation we had the other night. We were crammed into my little office, occasionally interrupted by the dog, occasionally interrupted by the chink of wine glasses. So yeah, we were lucky enough to be joined by Claire Solomons and Ewan Preston. They have been
banging the drum.
Throw me out. Sorry.
Campaigning to let our government know they're making a right mistake.
Putting it mildly. We're also joined by Lisa Mannering, who is a journalist and an advocate for her adopted children as well. She's got lived experience of this. We wanted to hear her experiences as well as ours.
And she listens to our podcast.
So we've got three now then.
Yes.
Me, you, and Lisa. It's kind of dropped off the agenda, this subject, obviously, because there are idiots in the world chucking bombs at each other, and that's taken up the news, and obviously people's attention has been diverted to how much they've got to pay for food and oil and all those things, energy. And so this is just one other thing, and I think that's why it's dropped off the agenda, but we need to put it back on, don't we?
Yes, definitely. There is far too many people who are going to be maybe already in a really bad place. And yes, people in power need to be made aware that we're not going to go away quietly.
I am Claire. I am a adoptive mum to 2 children. My background is actually as a paediatric nurse. So I was a paediatric nurse for 20 years, but gave that up 3.5 or so years ago in order to better meet my children's needs. And they found themselves out of school through no fault of their own. And that remained the case until this September, when they've got a specialist school provision now. Come last April, when cuts were made to the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund, after sort of a long delay, protracted delay of us waiting to find out what is going to happen with the fund, it rolled into sort of next financial year, and then sort of unexpectedly, then enormous cuts were made to the fund. And on the day that happened, that was sort of a button enough for me to say, that's a step too far. I've got to do something about that. So fairly impulsively set up a sort of campaign, if you like, that evening with a view to doing some sort of protest march. I didn't know what I was doing, no experience in campaigning or anything. And very gratefully, by the next day, Ewan had got in touch, and it sort of grew from there. I then became a campaigner, I suppose, which I feel more comfortable saying a year on than I did at the time. But yeah, and now very much see myself as a campaigner for adoptive and kinship children. Obviously, my personal experience is far more is adoption, but in trying to get adoptive and kinship children access to the right level of specialist therapeutic support at the right time. And obviously that has been very much trying to get that sorted through the ASGSF, and that will broaden, and our campaign will broaden with that, because the future looks like getting like the government are going to move in a different direction.
Brilliant, thank you. And there's lots of that we'll come on to, but Ewan, please go ahead.
Yes, so thank you for having me. I'm Ewan. I am a dad to two adoptive children. One adopted adult now, and a teenager. My eldest is a boy, and he is 20, and my youngest is 16. So I'm currently chair of the Potato Group. Potato Group is it's a UK-wide peer support organisation supporting families who are parenting young people, so teenagers, young adults, and adults who are adopted and have had significant early life challenges such as trauma, neurodivergence, and lots of other challenges along the way. When I saw the announcement that that there were going to be cuts to the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund, and I know the impact that has made on my own family and families close to me and to us, I knew that we needed to push back, and thankfully Claire started a campaign before anyone else needed to, and Claire has led this campaign since April 16th, ever since, in order to try to get the government to understand that this was a catastrophic error.
Totally, and I think what we'd like to do at first, to make things a bit clearer to people, give us an idea of what actually has changed, because it's one of those things that, as an adopter, you are aware of certain things that are there to help you in terms of funding. Getting that funding is a different matter. Well, it's a battle, as we all know. But anyway, it's there, and you can access it if you are skilled enough. What's changing then? What have they proposed, so we can make it really clear to our listeners?
So I guess the first thing to say is that it has changed, and it changed basically with immediate effect back in April last year. There used to be sort of 3 different strands to the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund. You could apply for a pot of money up to £2,500 for your child to have a multidisciplinary assessment of their needs. And then there was something called the Fair Access Limit, which was £5,000. And you could use that to access therapeutic support for your child in a calendar year. And then for children with the highest level of need, you could access something called match funding, and that was up to £30,000 per year. And that was the local authority would, for simplicity, pitch in 50% of that amount, and the ASGSF topped it up. And now, since the cuts were made in April last year, there's no longer a separate specialist assessment fund at all, so that's gone. Match funding has completely gone. And then the fair access limit has been cut to £3,000. And within that £3,000, you're allowed to access an assessment. But most of those assessments did cost the majority of that £2,500. So you'd be left with around £500 to try and navigate a year's worth of therapeutic support which just, it doesn't come close to being enough. So children are faced basically between a 60% cut in what they could previously access and a 90% cut if you were accessing match funding. And the impact of that has been enormous. That's the essence of the cuts that came in. And it's really important to say that those cuts were brought in without any consultation process and without any evidence base. There wasn't any evidence out there that suggested all of this money was being wasted, and £3,000 is ample to provide children with what they need. It was just an arbitrary number that came about. Ewan clearly is going to say something. Go.
You could see the rage building in me. And it was a decision that was made, as we understand it, at Treasury level. So this wasn't made by the Department for Education. So this fund was set up in 2015, at that time called the Adoption Support Fund, and not many of us knew it existed, even when we really could have benefited, and our young people could have benefited from it. And then over time, more and more people discovered that it existed. Also, the government made a decision rightly to include young people who are under special guardian arrangements, which is when it became this Adoption Special Guardianship Support Fund. And what that meant was more and more families were accessing it who needed to access it. And what that meant was that the fund was growing, and also it was overspending. And my understanding, if I'm correct, is that the 2023 or 2024 budget, they overspent. And so the Treasury, a new government and the Treasury went, okay, we can't have this overspending. So what you're going to have to do is we're going to have to divide this further. And as Claire rightly said, they made a mathematical decision without carrying out any sort of impact analysis on what that was actually going to mean. What they didn't realize is it's not that these young people who need these interventions get a little bit less therapy. It's that actually often therapies become clinically unsafe, and so they can't be delivered. So some of the foundational therapies that our young people have been able to access in the past, they become unsafe to deliver, so they can't. Often people don't really understand and don't appreciate about when our young people access therapy. So there are reasons why this specialist therapy is so effective. And one of the fundamental reasons is because the specialists who deliver it understand the needs of our children. We have young people who have been deeply hurt by adults, and so they struggle to form relationships with adults. Services that in other contexts are really fantastic, such as CAMS, in the context of our children, don't really work because they tend to be, they're not very well designed in terms of what our children need, and certainly they don't tend to be long-term. The therapy that our children have received via the Adoption Special Guardianship Support Fund has very often been long-term in nature, because there needs to be that relational element, and that it takes time for our children and our young people to trust a therapist. That reduction, even in those interventions that are safe to deliver under the reduced fair access limit, mean that they are time limited, and that really impairs the ability for our children to form trusting relationships with those professionals.
It's really interesting what you've just said, and I'll talk over Carl if he lets me. It's really interesting because until you've lived that life, I don't think anybody can make a decision that's based on any real knowledge until you've seen. Now, I think one thing that's clear about my adopted children in comparison to, say, Carl's, my children's needs are fairly low now, I think. But still, the therapy that my oldest has had has taken a long, long time to even scratch the surface. And he's not a really difficult, I want to use the word case, but that's what I'm talking about. And I think that must be one of the things that gets to you as adopters as well, surely. I mean, what do you think about that? Is it something that a politician making a decision could understand lightly?
I think it is an enormous issue that the government don't understand the kind of level and scale and complexity of need among adopted children. I think, and until the government accept that, it's very hard to move forwards in the right directions. And we see continually they're using minimizing language and talking as if that the children that need therapeutic support, specialist therapeutic support, are this sort of small, really complicated layer right at the top. And there's just a few of them. And everyone else generally is fine just with the love of a good parent. And maybe if the parent's lucky, a bit of peer support and maybe some extra parent training. And in reality, we could love our children, and we do, infinite amounts, and they're amazing. But our children's needs can overwhelm the ability of the most capable, most loving parents to meet them. And you need additional scaffolding and additional services in place. And we're very, I very much would advocate for peer support and parents to have certain training at the right moments. But I don't think that's ever going to replace the need for specialist therapeutic support. So, yeah, I think it's really underestimated by government, and it's a huge issue.
But there's a policy coherence problem, because the government's own data, it sets out very clearly the level of clinical need that exists within our community, but the policy directions don't. And it's difficult not to make assumptions as a parent about what's driving those decisions, and that this is making policy fit budget rather than policy meet need.
And I think, like you mentioned it in your email to us, but it's such a false economy. It might feel like a substantial investment now, but it will pay dividends, firstly and most importantly, for the child and the family unit to have the right support at the right time. Might cost more right now and will save in the long run so much more. We know that kinship children save the government or the kinship situation 4.3 billion a year, and adoption 4.2 billion a year. And we're talking about a fund that's 50 million a year. Each adopted child sort of brings back into the economic situation 1.3 million over their lifetime. And we don't want to talk in financial terms, but it doesn't make financial sense either. And I think we talked about the level of need, and there's so much evidence for the level of need. You look at the Adoption UK barometer, there's 42% of families are facing severe challenges or crisis. There's the Paper Group have done some amazing research far, far beyond the adoption order, which outlines the level of need in their community, which I think applies across, a lot of our community, not just in their group personally. And then, even the government's own funded research, like the Family Root study, talks about how important the ASGSF is, a specialist therapy is, and the complexity of needs, but then everything's moved in the wrong direction through policy.
And rightly, I think Claire and I have to talk about a lot the economics and make the economic argument. I think possibly because we suspect that's one that might be heard within certain departments. What we know from our own experience and from the experience of families close to us, what made the ASGSF really special was the fact that families found it was actually effective. We have walked through many doors of many departments, many services, many statutory services, many third sector services who, while they can have some benefits for young people, often they don't. And that often for families, when they access that specialist therapy through the ASGSF, that was the first time they were working with a professional who understood what was happening within their homes and within our homes. Old and tired as Claire and I look now, this is the reason why we've stuck with this campaign for so long, because for so many families, this has been a lifeline.
You're in good company, looking tired. Thank you. My daughter said, don't forget the old. A bit of a question I wanted to ask is, on the last episode we were discussing about doing this, and both of us kind of messaged each other and said, we are so pleased that we are where we are in our adoption journey and that we aren't starting out now. So my son is now 11. He was our second foster placement, so we picked him up from the hospital when he was 3 days old. He became ours when he was 3. He came with a diagnosis of FASD. The birth wasn't ideal. He had to be resuscitated at birth. So he was diagnosed with ASD at 3, ADHD, obviously attachment issues. Mainstream school was a waste of time. We warned them that you need to put things in place, because when he turns up, you've not put things in place, you're not going to cope. But, as we've said in a previous episode, they didn't listen, and he eventually turned up. And he's now in a specialist provision, which, we still have the odd little bit. It was 20 past 11 when we got into school this morning. But we've got PAs who we're really, really lucky with. One of our PAs has been battered a few times, but still keeps coming. And she's got, fantastic memories. So we've got the right school. We've got a really good disability social worker. We've got good PAs. And we feel we've got all the diagnoses that we need. If we were starting our journey now and we'd not got any of that, how would it look for us as adopted parents trying to get that help? Is it available? Would it be available?
I genuinely don't know. And also, by the way, the support that you were describing there were very specific to your family, and that I would be stepping out of my wheelhouse if I was to try to talk about that. I think that there are very worrying directions of travel in terms of send reform at this point in time. But certainly the focus for Claire and I over the last best part of a year, coming up to a year anniversary very soon, has been laser focused on this particular, if from a campaigning perspective at least, has been laser focused on this particular fund.
It would be fair to say it's going to be significantly harder or it's looking like it's going to be significantly harder over the next decade than it has been over the last decade to be able to access specialist assessments for your children and specialist therapeutic support for your children. And let's face it, given that we've all parented over the last decade, hasn't been easy even then, has it? For us, like you talked about, not everybody even knew about the ASDSF and how to access that support, and you still had to navigate a whole load of systems and face a lot of delays at your regional adoption agency to get a social worker to do an assessment before you can access the ASDSF and so on. But the direction of travel for me is incredibly worrying.
And if you'll forgive the obviously not serious question, but what is it that we've been doing so well, so much too well, that means that we can start rolling all this stuff back?
I can't answer that question.
We're model parents, though, aren't we?
I won't go that far.
Yeah, we are. I think, as Carl said, we're in a good place because, we're at a stage where our children have been through a lot of the assessments. However, I've got a younger son who, for various reasons, we haven't done a lot of exploration yet. Basically, because his brother was a handful enough to have to sort out. And so now we're thinking, right, okay, now there's some things we need to concentrate on him. And I fear that it's going to be a completely different situation. And so it was hard enough that time around, a couple of years before some assessments were able to be carried out. And I just fear even more now. And so that makes me really concerned for him and other people with, far more significant issues than his. So I don't really know what my question is, but it's a fear, I suppose, isn't it, of how things are. And
it is complex. I think for lots of us that have the young person whose needs come to the fore before the other ones, that this is really complicated, and I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't have my children's consent for me to talk about the specifics of our situation. But what I've certainly experienced with ours is that once one of our young people was doing a little bit better, the other one's needs were then able to come to the fore simply because of what was happening within the household. And that as a parent can make you feel extraordinarily guilty and ashamed, because our focus was on, the squeaky wheel, as it were, and maybe overlooked the needs of the other young person. And interestingly, I think for you, Claire, because your young people are not separated by age in the way that mine are, that's a different dynamic again, isn't it?
Yeah, but interestingly, to some degree, they will ebb and flow. Like, I think there must be a sort of innate sense within our children that if someone's taking the space in that moment in the home, they have to hold it together, and then they'll switch. So I've definitely experienced that, and with a sort of explosion of need at the start, it's very much like that one. It was just, completely apparent, and we were sort of plunged into crisis and focused in one area, and then suddenly, hang on a minute. Yeah. Which is another complexity that I think everybody here, by the sounds of it, has sibling groups. And I think that we've discussed at times the sort of added layer of complexity when you're parenting multiple traumatized children, because of competing need and trauma bonds and previous shared experiences for them. And yeah.
So I think it's a good time now to bring Lisa in. We were basically setting the scene, Lisa, of what the changes are. I'm interested in seeing how you've dealt with how you've brought your children up so far, but also what you fear maybe down the line as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? We're in a period where there's just lots of cuts, and they're coming at us left, right, and centre. So the interesting thing is, I've got two children, and one had been given had his diagnoses and done before the cuts, which is good. And my other child, unfortunately, this year we've had to cut short his sensory integration therapy so that we can concentrate on getting a diagnosis and for the ADHD and developmental trauma, because that to me is really important in terms of unlocking help, but also in getting the medication that he needs as well. And it's just awful that I've had to make that choice of going, right, okay, we definitely need that. That's really important because it's going to unlock help at school, hopefully. It's going to unlock help for medication, but we've got no money in terms of a sensory integration therapy. And it's really horrible, because now I just know the behaviour is we've gone back to the beginning, and it's just like, oh gosh, asking the local authority, can we have, is there any money? And for this, by speaking to the RA, can you speak to the local authority for money for this? And it's a trade-off, isn't it? And it's just difficult, because all the time, what they don't tell you is when you first adopt is that, yes, you've got to advocate. And I feel as if it's been the making of me, because I don't think I was ever really good at advocating, but you've had to become really good, champion form filler, and really good at advocating for your children at every turn, whether it's at school, whether it's filling in forms to get DLA, whether it's making sure that your child gets seen by CAMS, and that the right level of CAMS support as well. And then when you get your EHCP, you're constantly okay, I'm getting the right support as well. So it just feels as if life is just constantly advocating, and it's just so difficult.
Didn't we all set out as part of the team that I think when we're being prepared to adopt, that we feel like we're part of a team, that we're being supported by professional services? And then in the early days, when there's still a lot of professional involvement, you're sort of seen as part of the team. And then there is a sort of inflection point where the challenges become sort of intractable, that they overwhelm capacity for us as parents to meet on our own, and for those services that we're already interacting with to meet. And that's when lots of families, unfortunately, find that those services that they thought were there to support them turn on them. And this is unfortunately endemic in our community, and certainly Potato Group's research documents that in detail. that, we thought that we were. I remember when I was at panel to be approved to adopt my children, and there are various questions that the different panel members will ask you. There's one that sticks in my mind particularly, which was a panel member asked me, what are you going to do when your child or children really push your buttons and really and you start to struggle to retain your own emotional regulation? But I said in response, I said, well, I'm going to ask for support because we've been told there would be support there. And everybody ticked a little box on their form, and we moved on to the next question. And that gives you the impression as a parent that they know what support is going to be required, and that when you contact them to ask them for that particular support that your family needs, they will reach up on a shelf and they'll pull out a file that has a list of support that they can give you. And actually what you find is that the support that they do give you, which we engage with gratefully, I have to say, so parenting courses, attachment courses, PACE, that sort of thing, lots of really useful stuff in there, but it doesn't go far enough and it doesn't meet the needs of our young people. And I think that can be it's a distressing and destabilizing thing for parents to experience. And you're weighing all this up against the fact that you're constantly being told that all children do that, and family members and friends around you are vacillating between going, no, it's fine, that's what parenting is, and also, wow, your children can be quite high need in certain situations, and it's a really bewildering place to find yourself as a parent.
Do you want to come in, Lisa? Sorry.
Yeah, I was talking about this with a friend the other day. She's adopted 2 boys, and they've got FASD as well, and she's had a terrible time of it. Is having a terrible time of it, with CAMS, with the getting access to funding for therapies and stuff. And they are this close from it breaking down, and we were talking the other day about, like, with the NHS you have like guidelines and processes of like pathways with everything, and but with adoption there's just no pathway. You've no idea when you go on this path actually what it will look like. You just don't. I'd never heard of executive functioning disorder, EHCP, and all these different jargon, DLA and everything else. But yet you stumble across it and you end up becoming very well versed, but not everyone has that gifting. Some people are better than others at advocating, at finding out and what have you. And then some people just aren't. And actually, most of us aren't because we're too busy firefighting day to day. And let's not even talk about the fact that trying to hold down a job whilst doing this at the same time. It's just nuts.
84% in the Adoption UK barometer, 84% of adoptive parents have changed jobs, reduced hours, or stopped working altogether in order to try and meet their children's needs. So there's these sort of ripple effect out is enormous as well. And it's just all of it. Over the last year, we've seen anything we could access just stripped back to the point of rendering it ineffective. Lisa's talked about having to compromise therapy for assessment. And we saw that in our campaign survey findings that 36%, so it covered 777 children, but 36% of families were facing that kind of impossible choice between, should I get my child assessed so I know what their needs are, but then have to wait another year before I can get any kind of therapy.
Sorry to interrupt, but also one of the challenges with that is that because our children are children, their needs are changing constantly, and so you can get an assessment in 1 year, and then, are we going to get the therapy for what needs that assessment showed? Well, no, because they may need an assessment for their developmental stage.
And it keeps you in a crisis-led system, doesn't it? Because once you've waited a year and you were already in real need of help a year ago, and it probably took you 6 months minimum to get to the point you're even in front of someone to have an assessment, once you've navigated your regional adoption agency and so on. It's just like the system is just set up to fail our children, to fail our family. And And yeah, we've seen as a result of the cuts, we had sort of 5 key findings really briefly, but it showed an increase in school exclusions, a decrease in school engagement amongst 50% of those children, families being plunged into crisis, some really sadly not being able to stay together any longer because the right support wasn't going to be in place, deterioration in parent mental health, children's mental health. It's just awful. And recruitment numbers are falling fairly rapidly. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to join the dots. But if you take away, if parents are worried that there won't be the support in place to be able to meet their children's needs, then that's a harder journey to take.
I think what you were saying, Ewan, and you, Lisa, about you hear at this point, your child is this age, but then when you get to eventually being seen, their needs have changed. Those meds that they're on then now don't work. And Lisa, it's a full-time job. You're constantly filling in forms. You're constantly on the phone trying to get some help. You get the help. You take the child to an appointment, and my son, the first time he went to CAMS, he shut down, and they were like, "We can't see any issues. We're closing his file." When we started this journey doing this podcast, we both of us were not in a very good place.
Angry.
Yes, very upset and very sweary. When we actually came to doing the podcast, that was recording, we'd done a bit before, we were in a better place. But what it took us to get to that better place was ridiculous. And like I say, you're constantly filling forms, you're constantly on the phone. You have to grow a thick skin and ignore the noise from society. I think the point is the fact that, like I said earlier, I am so grateful that we are where we are now and we're not starting the journey, but I still have worries of we recently spoke about the fact that occasionally we'll have a blowout and I'll get knocked about a little bit. I accept that that's going to happen. But he's 11 now. I'm worried what it's going to be like if it's still the same when he's 13, 14, and we've got the support in. We've had crises, we've had the police, but we've got things in place. My worry is for the people who haven't got that support, who haven't got this bloke sitting next to you, who know I can send a message and say, I feel like crap. And he'll go, I know. There are people out there who haven't got that. There are people out there who've got to make that choice of, do I get the diagnosis or do I get the therapy? We've had both, and, we're doing okay. I worry. I still worry about the future, what it's going to bring with my son, but I'm so worried for people out there who haven't got what we've got and haven't got what we've got as a family, as a support.
Can I comment on that? So, I'm lucky to be able to represent a large, a UK-wide peer-to-peer support community that has been enormously helpful for me personally, my family, but also to many families over its 13 years of being in existence. And I'm so grateful to the people who established it. And before we started recording, you guys were talking about the fact that you have your WhatsApp group, which sounds like it's all dads. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is brilliant, because I think that we did a back of a fag packet calculation when I'd first sort of got involved with the potato group, that dads were outnumbered by mums 20-1. Okay, so dads weren't doing an awful lot of the peer-to-peer support, so it's really, really great. But just to say that, it is hugely powerful. A lot of us find ourselves quite isolated. We find our support networks aren't quite as robust as maybe they were prior, when we were being asked about our support networks and that sort of thing. Understandably so, but also because there are certain things that you can't say to people who are close to you about what's happening within your household because it can be quite frightening. So you know, if you find people who get it, there's a huge amount of value to that. But the other side to that is that I worry about the extent to which peer support is being proposed as an alternative to specialist therapeutic interventions. I also worry about the independence of what's being proposed to some extent as well. So the Potato Group is a completely independent community, and obviously your WhatsApp group is a completely independent community. So you can speak completely openly, and you can be very safe to know that you can say things there that are not going to get repeated elsewhere. Whereas if those peer support networks are perhaps being run by, statutory services, that I don't think it creates a little conflict of interest there. But yeah, there's nothing like talking to other adopters, to people who get it. Absolutely.
Since these cuts have come in, have there been more breakdowns?
We don't know. We don't know yet. There is a process by which the government track how many young people are entering the care system. They are supposed to record what the circumstances were that led those young people to come to the care system. And one of those features is, were they in permanence before that? So had they been in an adopted placement, or perhaps, alternatively, had they been with first families? What we know from the Freedom of Information request that the BBC carried out is that there are a significant number of young people who are re-entering the care system having been in adopted placements, but that not all of the local authorities are reporting them. So what we don't have is a complete picture. But also, in terms of subsequent to the cuts, we don't have that data yet.
No, like we know anecdotally people that have contacted our campaign that say it as a direct result of the cuts. And I know that, some of the leading charities have been contacted and, by families in those positions. But yeah, in terms of trend, there's a general trend. If you look at the Adoption UK barometer again, they've gone from 3% in 2018 to 7% last year of children leaving the home prematurely. But we know that that's probably quite a large underestimation, if you like, because figures are, as Ewan says, incomplete.
And just on the anecdotal evidence that you've just mentioned, has there been any kind of evidence that there are people who have newly adopted that are finding it more and more tough? Has anybody said, look, okay, this is ridiculous, I don't know what to do now? And I suppose some of those people that the change is going to affect would have been on their adoption training before they were handed their child. Have there been any stories where people have said, just, this isn't what I was promised?
What we do know is that families who that young people have benefited from the therapy and interventions that are available by the ASGS have had those taken away. We have very, very clear qualitative information around that, and lots of families being plunged into crisis as a result.
I've been making a few notes as you've been chatting, and everyone has, said some really amazing things. And the thing that really stuck out for me, I mean, we've talked about, we've mentioned, very touched on adoption poverty, something that I'm really, really passionate about. In that a lot of us have had to step back from working full time, or step away from our careers, or go part time, or even not work at all. I know that Claire and you've had to step back completely from your career. And I know that the work that the Belay Foundation did in terms of adoption poverty back in 2024, it just feels as if, like, even though Rachel Reeves is really wanting everyone to go back, she talks about economic inactivity, but yet you have a whole cohort, mostly most adopters, you've had pretty good careers, and we've had to step back from that. So I don't know, I just really can't understand the government's thinking by not supporting us, because if they support our children, that we're supporters, we're able to stay in the workplace. So that just mind boggles me. But also the social thinning. I know that I've listened to I love listening to your podcast because you're so funny, and you talk about the anecdotes that are going on, and we're listening to it going, yeah, completely get that. And since we've adopted, our social circle has, I think it was an eco map at the beginning when you first adopted, and it is a historical work of fiction. It really is. And I just think, where are those people? Where are my friends? Where have they gone? It's just so different now.
It does grow a little bit. The further down, definitely. But I think the thing, what you were saying, Lisa, about finishing work, myself and my wife had to swap roles when my son was 3, and it probably, within 12 months, it started having a negative impact on me mentally, because I was an engineer, I was a welder and fabricator, but I used to go to different parts of this country, I used to go to Europe, working on site, different cultures, different languages, but it was the workplace banter of and the routine, get up, go to work, your brain's constantly going, you have a laugh, and then it was gone. And I kind of, after 12 months, lost my identity of what I was. And then obviously my son's behaviours weren't great, and so it just compounded. And thankfully I've recently started part-time, and my wife says the difference is unbelievable. But it's a massive life changing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you used to say to me, how on earth do you find time to go to work? And I think that's what hit me. I think the work I was doing was so intense. I'm kind of burnt out in many ways. I'm trying to find another job now because I don't have one at the moment. But I do wonder about how we do get that message through to those people that are clearly not making the right decisions. And I was just thinking about, the stats that we have about the amount of money, how many children are affected by this. I think the world we live in right now, we've all become a little bit desensitized to any numbers. It's like there's a war going on and there's so many people dying here, and so many people don't think, well, these are people. They're numbers. And I think same thing is what's going on in this situation, because whether or not we need to have a platform in front of a politician to say, this is the reality, listen to Carl. Let Carl show you his body, not any dodgy way. Look at the bruises, look at the bite marks, look at holes in the wall, all these things that are happening on a daily basis to thousands of people. Now, I have no shame in explaining to anybody the reality of, what happens. But maybe that's what it takes to make someone listen. And for instance, one of our group was telling us how, his son held a knife at his throat and said, I'm going to kill you now. Now, until you hear that firsthand, I don't know how you're going to get through to someone who's making those decisions. And I know there's not enough money, but they find money to drop. I'm not going to get political, but they can find money for things.
Yeah, I think they can. We've sat in front of Josh McAllister, so the current Minister for Children and Families. We've met with the DFE, and I either find that they're, in Josh McAllister's case, fairly unmoved by those things when we tell them. And so you pivot from an emotional pitch to a factual pitch and a numbers pitch, and that seems to leave him unmoved. Or you're met with kind of platitudes and, adopters are great, you're superheroes, and it's just, words you just don't want to hear and don't help us whatsoever. And actually, no, we're highly skilled therapeutic parents, highly skilled advocates. We know our children's needs, and you need to listen. Like you're saying, you're talking about those individual people, children are children, and they matter. They all matter so much. And I have been flabbergasted. I'm just going to be very frank. I'm flabbergasted. I keep waiting to meet somebody in power that I think truly wants to hear the truth and really is passionate about helping our children. And it keeps not happening. I keep thinking, when I say this or prove this, they'll get it and we'll move off in the right direction, because surely, because it makes sense on every single level. For our kids, it makes sense. Financially, it makes sense. For all of our sanity, it makes sense. But it just doesn't happen. They talk about tough decisions.
But Claire, it's mad that you even have to do this. I mean, where are the big organisations that should be representing us? Where is the lived experience and the leadership? And it feels to me as if we're targeting politicians and they're still not listening, are they the wrong department? Is it because we're targeting the DFE and actually it's a different department? It feels like some of the issues are almost cross-departmental and it's not the DFE. And because it falls in between the cracks of the different departmental voices, that's why our voice isn't being heard. And it is the lack of experience, lived experience at the top. And because of the lack of it, it feels as if we're just shouting into the wind.
The next time you have a meeting, Claire, could I bring my son to the meeting?
No one wants that.
And just see, what they think.
Exactly. You think, it would be another case if you think, well, surely they'll listen now. There's been adoptee inquiry reports recently, the sort of first of their kind. And they outline all the things we're talking about, and still we move in the wrong direction. It's so incredibly hard. You feel like you're faced with career politicians and various other things. And, we've also met lots of politicians that really care, but they aren't the ones that are in our current, government in power and can make changes happen.
We're at a very interesting moment in time at the moment, and something we've not really touched on. So the minister last month announced reforms and also a public consultation. And so we do have some capacity to influence policy. I wrote to the minister and he wrote back to me. And I think I mostly gave him a bit of a headache because, personally, I have significant concerns over the public consultation. It's really not fit for purpose, especially the elements of it which are, or the specific consultation that is inviting responses from our children and young people. It was not designed with our children's needs in mind. The nature of the way that the consultation is designed worryingly feels a little bit like it's about signing off on a predetermined policy direction, although I'm reassured that that's not the case. To people who are listening to this podcast, what I would say is, please do participate in this consultation, because this is going to influence what post-adoption support is going to look like post-2028. But also, the consultation doesn't provide, I think, the scaffolding that it requires to adequately get across the lived experience that does need to be shared. That to use the opportunities, because it's quite open text boxes, to tell as much detail, give as much detail, tell your story as best you can, and not necessarily be too led by it. They use those kind of standard. It's a thing called a Likert scale, where you go from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and then ask questions in aspirational language, like things that obviously we want, like should there be adoption support, early interventions, etc. And obviously you're going to click yes. It worries me about how meaningful the response is if people are not properly briefed in terms of how they can influence policy. The other aspect of it which really worries me is that where we're talking about therapeutic interventions, for any of us who've needed to access ASGSF interventions, what has led us there have been events that have been traumatic, frankly, and that we struggle to talk about those events even in clinical environments. So asking us to put that into a u.gov form doesn't feel very psychologically safe. So that worries me. It worries me that that's the mode that the government has used in order to try to carry out this consultation. And look, I think, and understandably, the Department for Education were very excited to tell us about the fact that they were carrying out a consultation, because that's what Claire has been calling for a year now. But what it doesn't show is independence, which was one of the key asks, which is we need an independent consultation with the sector and with families, and it needs to be carried out in a way that is meaningful and thorough, and this just doesn't feel like that. But that said, I still encourage people to participate, because otherwise our voices don't have any hope of being heard.
We've put together, and you and dominantly, some guidance around the consultation that you can get on our website, because it does expose some of those flaws, if you like. Even the other day, I went to a session about this consultation. It was pointed out that there are 3 ways to agree with what's being said and only 2 ways to disagree, which, in itself is, but they're very leading. There's 8 proposals. They're very, very leading, very woolly, very unspecific, and they would say things that would make you think, well, yes, like it'll say, do you want therapeutic interventions to be backed up by evidence? And you think, yes, of course. But then if you realise that, Theraplay isn't NICE approved or ever, you might think otherwise. Or if it says, do you want peer support, good quality peer support? You'd think, yeah, but if that will be in place of specialist therapy, you might think, well, no, I'm not going to strongly agree then. And I think they're probably engineered it to get a good old bar graph that looks like all of their proposals are strongly agreed with, and it won't matter what you put in the qualitative data boxes, because they can whack out a bar graph and carry on with the plan that they have predetermined regardless, because I don't think we're yet to see the evidence that underpins their proposals. I would love to. There needs to be far more transparency and a much more rigour and independence for this consultation. It feels like lip service.
Within the consultation, there's a document that was published within the consultation. It underestimates the level of need, the level of clinical need, and it disagrees with the government's own commissioned research.
I think the worrying thing as well is something you said, Lisa, about the fact that a lot of parents are worn out. Are they going to have the time and the energy to read something correctly? I know I wouldn't. I'd scout. I can tell you now, I will have to listen to this episode of this podcast quite a few times for everything to go in. I will, because I'm shattered, and there's so many other parents who they'll look at it and they go, yeah, I'll do that, but I can't just do that right now, I'll do it in a little bit. And then there's a whoopsie moment with your child, and it's like...
what?
Autism course, early birds course.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bit like saying fizzy.
Oh.
Do you think that they rely on that? That the government is... because we're just too tired and too busy and just too knackered generally, that we're not really used to putting our head above the parapet, and so we really look to to Claire and to you, who are doing all this amazing sort of advocacy work on our behalf, because it feels like, yes, some of the Adoption UK are doing a great job in terms of advocating for us, but it feels like we just need that bit more. We need Adopt England to do more than they're doing. Or am I the only one that thinks that?
I think what this whole conversation has made me think is that, every single adopter needs to throw themselves behind the campaign and support you guys. And I would, happily raise my hand now and say I will do anything you need to do much as we can, because it is so important. And there's one thing that always sticks in my head, and it's one thing that Carl said to me early on, and he's going to hate me for saying this. It's the old... I don't think anybody grasps the concept that when you've met one neurodivergent child, you've met one neurodivergent child. And until it's realised by people that you can't get a broad brushstroke and go, right then, we'll sort that by giving them this, that and the other, and that's all fine. we're not going to get anywhere. And my fear is, no matter what government we have in power, we're going to be banging our heads against a brick wall. So I'd like to end, because obviously we're taking a lot of your time, any optimistic notes that we can bring, even if it is saying to people, yes, if you want this to change, do something about it. Any optimism? And I'll start with Lisa, because it's clockwise.
I'm hopeful that there will be change. Actually, I think that there are sections of the government, not necessarily those in power, and that are listening, and there will be individual MPs and who have people in their constituencies who will be lobbying the cabinet for change. So I think that it will come. It's just unfortunate that we're living in a veritable shit show right now, and with everything that's going on in the Ukraine, in the Middle East, and it's just with Trump, it just feels like the world is just imploding at the moment. And I know that newsrooms are looking more outwards rather than looking at domestic policies. We've got that as well. And so when you're trying to get journalists interested in this, it's not, I remember once pitching something to the Today programme, and the producer picked up the phone and were like, unless it's happening something right now and it's something really interesting and different, we're not interested. And I was just like, you're pitching to people who don't understand the issues, and that's part of the problem. And because newsrooms are looking outwards, they're getting smaller. The media fragmentation is a bit difficult. But I am hopeful that that if we just keep chipping away, there will be those who have a heart for this. And my particular MP, Munira Wilson, she's brilliant, and she keeps chipping away. She's a Lib Dem MP. She's absolutely brilliant at bringing things to Parliament, and I'm hopeful that things are going to change, and hopefully in the right direction in the future. And I think it's just up to everybody who's listening to this. If you're a doctor, you have to take part in the consultation. You have to give your thoughts, bearing in mind what Solly's just said about the actual way that's been set up. It feels like the way it's set up, that it's looking for a particular answer. Like, you're not supposed to do questionnaires like that. I don't quite know how a consultation's been set up like it, but anyway.
Ewan, give us some optimism and some hope.
Listen, what did we get into this for? We got, and actually the word that Lisa, you've just used the most, it's one of my favourites, is hope. What did we get into this for? We got into this because we wanted to have families, and because we love our children. And that's what keeps me going, hope and love. And I think that's what keeps all of us going. And I don't think that we have to wait for people in positions of power to give us what we're asking for. I think what we do is we make the case, and we keep doing it, and we keep going. And listen, I'm never going to stop loving my children, which means I'm never going to stop having hope.
My hope is, this is an example of, is that I do think there's a swell in our community. I think many areas of our community are speaking up and speaking out. There's podcasts like yours. It's all of these opportunities we can take to try and explain the needs of our children and what our children need and how to meet those needs, and try and get government to listen, try and change culture and understanding around adoption. But I think that's been hugely heartwarming throughout the last year, is how many people come together and how we're all supportive of each other. And we'll fight. You clearly all will. Everyone here will. We will fight with everything we've got for our own children. And because we know when we've had those bits of help, how incredibly important they are, we will, if any of us, when we have capacity, and people will not always have capacity, is very clear, but as and when they do, if they can do fill in the consultation if they can, support our campaign if they can, listen to a podcast if they can. It's all these bits together. We have to hope that we're pulling a flipping heavy, annoying train roughly in the right direction.
Is there anything we can do could you email Martin with any links that we can? We've only got a small group, but we've got a Facebook page. Hopefully my daughter over here is going to do some TikTok. So is there anything you could send to us that we could spread the word a little bit?
Definitely. We've got ready to go now. We'd have MP template letter and a policy briefing for MPs. And as Lisa said, there are lots of supportive ones, and the more noise they can make, and Westminster debates and things. So we can send those because it facilitates people writing to their MPs and makes it easier. And we can send the consultation info that we've sort of put together, and it has Adoption UK's info within it as well. Hopefully supports those two things. And I guess then it's keeping in touch, isn't it? Because we can, if every adopter pings it to another adopter.
It's incredible because I think we all feel so passionately. I remember when we did our book that we had to put together to introduce ourselves to our kids all those years ago. I remember writing in the book, I will always fight for you, to my kids, and they remember that, and we have to do it, because who else is going to do it? We've learnt that, and I think the support network is vital between those that understand, and if we can do anything like that, it's vital work.
And just to add as well, that I think that there are people that you'll meet on your path and who become your champions and have become part of your sort of, the parent support, whether they're coming to meetings with you. And I'm really lucky to have an amazing lady and from our regional adoption agency who's absolutely blinking amazing. And I've also I've met some teachers along the way that are amazing. And also I've heard of friends who have got really good post-adoption social workers. So there are a lot of people who seem to be also fighting against the system. And I think that when you've got have people in your life that are really good at advocating with you, it just makes all the difference.
The power that individual practitioners can have on our families can't be overstated. And I've talked to lots of families and young people who it could be the one teacher, or it's the post-adoption social worker, or often it's the ASGSF funded therapist, but that individual practitioner has made a huge difference in that family's well-being.
Or even CAMS as well. Even CAMS have been amazing with us. So
thank you all so much for your time. Yeah, anything we can do, let's please stay in touch.
Yeah, that'd be really nice.
Well, that was pretty depressing, I think, but also there are some positives. Well, what do you think needs to happen here to have these voices, our voices, Claire's voice, Ewan's voice, Lisa's voices heard? What do you think we need to do?
It is that thing about having voices heard. For so long, it's been a very private. Adopters don't want to talk about the struggles that they have. And us doing this podcast is allowing other adopters to know that they're not alone. And unfortunately, these people who are making these decisions, you said it in this episode, and Claire said that she's, spoken to loads of politicians, MPs, and they just don't get it. They don't have the lived experience. So the decisions that they make have a massive impact on us, and probably, maybe they have... No, they don't impact them, so they're not that bothered. And I think it is the fact that it's up to us, as a collective, to keep shouting. What did I say in the first step? It's the one who shouts the loudest that gets the most. And although it shouldn't be like that, I think we have just got to keep shouting and let them know that when we've got our kids' backs for the rest of our lives, so we will fight for them as physically possible and mentally possible as we can. And hopefully, in the ideal world, they will eventually listen.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that what I find disappointing is what you've just said about people not wanting to share their story, because I don't give a monkey's what people think about my family.
No.
And if they can't understand why certain behaviours are as they are. But I don't care. I'm sorry. I'm not apologising to people because of how my children live, and I think, or have ended up like they are. And I think the strength that we've had in this show is in hearing some real strong stories. For instance, Chris, one of the dads, was talking about how his son pulled a knife on him and was gonna kill him, and how he got out of that. And that's, that child, his child, a human being, needs to be looked after and nurtured and helped to find out what on earth makes that happen and how to stop it from happening. It's vital work that is going to be lost. And I just don't think there's any connection between the people making these decisions and those of us who are living through it. And until, one of the ministers responsible comes and spends a week, say, in my house, low-level disruption, or in your house, where you're balancing so many different things, how are they going to know? They're not going to know.
No. I mean, unfortunately, the ones that are advocating for us aren't in power. I mean, I've watched loads of videos, and, some of them have been on the Facebook page of Claire's. And there are people, there are MPs who are trying to fight our corner. And the things that they're saying, are really good, and it's fantastic that we have got these people. Unfortunately, like Claire said, they're not in power. And it would seem from the outside that the party that are in power maybe haven't got the MPs that are trying to champion our cause.
Which raises the question, well, which party does?
Mm-hmm.
So that is a concern. Without wanting to be political, without wanting to end it. Also, don't want to end on a negative note, because my own view is that there needs to be a whole root and branch change to policy about schooling and about welfare, full stop, to make these things change amongst all areas of society, which will have an impact on how families are. So, it's kind of, things need to be addressed, but then, the rest of the place is in such a mess. There's a war going on. There's a lot of money that could be channeled into other routes if everyone just got on with each other.
I'll say this now, but I really hope you enjoyed this app as much as we enjoyed it. First guest that we've had on, and it was really, really good, really powerful, and I really enjoyed it. Go on, Mart. Over to you.
No, I'm done. Thank you, Carl, for being here.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Adopters Anonymous. Carl and Martin will be back with more on this, and so any questions or comments you have, please email us. Our email address is adopters.anonymous@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page where you can find more content, plus a brand new TikTok account. Expect dancing, singing, and general tomfoolery from the boys.